she does this with enthusiasm. She might, according to Faber, she might be the most intellectually capable individual involved here, which really, again, my not knowing a great deal about Schlafly, I wasn't certain about this, but you can see how she's thinking all the time. And one of the things she does, keep in mind that FDR's shadow is over this whole thing. There's a great book about this, incidentally, called In the Shadow of FDR, which talks about everything in American history after FDR. But what he has to say about her is, he points out this thing that I didn't remember, but she remember FDR talked about the 4 freedoms. How people ought to have freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom from poverty. And what she does instead is she calls the 4 most vital freedoms. And in her view, opposing these to Roosevelt's 4 freedoms, she says they're freedom to keep our religious heritage, as though somebody was trying to undermine that. Freedom from obscenity, freedom from criminal attack, and freedom from communist conspiracy. Okay, 4 freedoms according to Phyllis Schlafly. One thing that Farber does suggest in here is, he's good in suggesting that despite her talents, Schlafly was not always very far from fringes of political belief. Now, let's get to Ronald Reagan. One of the things where Reagan kind of stands out here is most of these other people had been, conservative from the beginning. They hadn't gone through kind of a transformational process. Reagan, on the other hand, had voted for Roosevelt 4 times. Okay, so what makes him different? Well, Farber traces it to his income. He says the wealthier he became, the more concerned he became about his taxes, and the more he turned to the Republican Party. And so the more money he's got, it's this direct kind of cause and effect thing. And that doesn't seem to be like there's a great deal of intellectual thought gone into Reagan's transformation. He is simply reacting that he's losing more of his money to taxes. Okay, so this is a thing that really shows up with a lot of these Republicans. These 6 people anyway, is that they tended to be people who had wealth to begin with. And as he said about Robert Taft, when Taft was campaigning in '48, complained that the New Dealers said nothing of the necessity of hard work and sacrifice to reach a higher standard of living. Well, Taft is born with a silver spoon in his mouth. What is he talking about hard work to gain achievement? So we've got the same thing with George Bush later. Another person who, the famous quip about him is that here's a guy who was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. There is this assumption that somehow he earned this and deserved this. Reagan, of course, kind of specialized in this ability to give these up from the bootstraps sort of lectures, where he would say, we all got to pull ourselves together. The fact is, he's coming from a position of significant wealth. Now, Farber also talks about civil rights and race, how they've been a central problem for the conservatives since the 40s. They're always quick to point out about themselves that they're not racists. Farber largely agrees with this. But perhaps the conservatives protest a little too much. Over and over, the principle of states' rights and restrained federal authority seem only to come to a boil, only become really important when it comes to the issue of African American civil rights. Goldwater famously voted against the '64 Civil Rights Act, and in his book, Conscience of a Conservative, said that while he personally believed in civil rights, Southerners ought to be free to make their own choices. Of course, this neatly ignores all those black Southerners who didn't have the right to vote and could not have changed this situation in the South. Reagan is kind of a thing that is often forgotten. He opened his 1980 presidential campaign in Mississippi, in Neshoba County. This was the site of gruesome civil rights violence. He spoke only of states' rights at this scene of civil rights violence. He never mentioned the blacks who'd been killed there. But this is this issue. When they come to civil rights, they talk about states' rights. Now third, there has really been this close connection between political conservatives and the religious right. Most of us generally think of the latter as Protestant fundamentalists, and this is a bit of a painful thing for me because I am Catholic, but Farber really has us focus on the profound influence of right-wing Catholicism. Buckley and Schlafly are Catholics. Farber also points out that the 5-person majority on the Supreme Court today is Catholic. So this legacy of the linkage between conservatism and Catholicism is this kind of enduring thing. You know, often when we think about, you know, Bible-thumping right-wingers, we're thinking about Protestants. But here at the heart of this are a number of Catholics. Now, one last thing I think about this is a lot of you are aware of this Richard Hofstadter's book that he wrote, I think about like 57, the Paranoid Tradition in American Politics. Farber uses that idea. He says that conservatives often resort to conspiracy theories, to half-truths, to outright lies, to wild fantasies, to demagoguery. Phyllis Schlafly, writing about the economy in her book, A Choice Not an Echo, complained about the Bilderberg Group. You know, I've seen this pop up too, this is a popular story. That controls the world's economy. In fact, she echoed a long tradition of this stuff, these conspiracy theorists going back for a long time. She foreshadowed some of the things that people have said more recently. She also is recorded as saying that she admitted to a friend that she knew the assertion wasn't true, but, quote, this is the sort of thing that our people lap up and love. So there's a certain amount of calculation of Schlafly that it's very interesting to see her operate. Now, oh, incidentally, in looking for some information about Farber, I discovered that she'd actually written something about Farber's book. But all it does is list her as one of the leading lights in the conservative movement. That's all she says about it. She doesn't say any of this other stuff. So that's sort of interesting. Now, with the Tea Party in mind and the recent elections in mind, it might be easy to say that Farber is mistaken about the rise and fall of the conservative movement. He says basically about Bush that what he did is he brought so many things to the forefront during his presidency. He didn't create new ideas about conservatism. He felt that he inherited conservatism and that people ought to just vote for him, despite the fact that, you know, it's completely unbridled spending, which seems to be against conservative viewpoints. And also that, you know, he wouldn't be a nation builder and ends up being a big nation builder. He violates Robert Taft's conceptions about not intervening overseas. He starts 2 wars. So the way Farber viewed this at the end of the Bush presidency and the victory of President Obama is that what this signaled was the collapse of the conservative movement. But now we know stuff that Farber didn't know from the book. And I don't know what he really thinks about this now. But I think one way we can interpret what's happened here is that he might be right that the principal concepts behind the modern conservative movement were destroyed by George Bush. And that what we see now really is just the destructive politics of only opposition. That is, as we have heard Republicans called most recently, the party of no. An unwillingness to compromise on anything because compromise is seen as being weak. This is a far cry from the origins of the movement under Taft. Taft was a great politician, if nothing else, and he compromised. He worked with the other senators. That's not the kind of thing that we're seeing today.